Welcome to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast, where trauma survivors become healthy thrivers. Each month, we'll feature a theme in the trauma recovery and empowerment field. To promote your recovery, healing, and learning how to build dreams, here's your host, Karen Robinson, transformational coach and therapist.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Heal, Thrive, Dream podcast. Today, we have a special guest who is an expert in the trauma recovery field, working with clients on EMDR in consultation. Her name is Marisol, and I'm going to let her say her whole name because I'm just so petrified right now of messing it up.
Oh, it's okay. It's Marisol Solarte-Erlacher.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We are so honored to have you here with us today.
Oh,
I think my first question for you is, how did you get started on becoming a trauma recovery therapist, or do you have a better title that you use?
No, I that's a great title. I think I've always just said trauma therapist, trauma expert, but I love trauma recovery specialist. That feels like such a beautiful way to describe it.
Oh,
so
I give it to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take it. So how I got into the trauma field was, it was kind of a very serendipitous path for me. I think I never started my graduate school experience or my graduate school journey thinking that I wanted to work in trauma. I think I more wanted to work in my community and work with kids who were identified as like at risk at the time. Kids who needed support, based on or due to violence in the home, substance use disorder in the home. And, I felt very motivated to do that work. And then over the course of my graduate school journey, I thought that I really wanted to do addiction work. And then realized that, at the core of so much substance use is trauma, unresolved trauma. And my first internship was with working at a medical clinic, so a healthcare clinic that provided services for people who are underinsured or uninsured. And I worked primarily with Spanish-speaking patients who were all female. And what they had told me was that the majority of them were presenting with depression. And then when I started the work, I realized that the majority of them had significant unresolved childhood trauma. And that started this journey for me around really wanting to know more, really wanted to dig deep into, if this is the root, how do we actually get to resolution? How do we help, especially people that, I identify as Latina. And so I think I thought mainly about in my community, how do we start to really tackle helping people resolve early trauma, specifically sexual abuse and sexual assault. And then I was lucky enough to get my very first clinical position at what was formerly the Rape Assistance and Awareness Program here in Denver, Colorado. And I was a bilingual bicultural therapist full time. And it was really, oddly to say, my ideal job. I loved being in that position and I loved doing the work that I did. And I felt like it was the place where I really developed this passion around trauma recovery and trauma resolution.
Yeah, it was just a clear-cut purpose, right? There's a huge need, and you had some things other people wouldn't have, like the ability to speak two languages fluently and to also be Hispanic yourself. So that helps build authority with the Hispanic community, and then just having so much knowledge and education around a topic, I think could be very comforting to survivors. So that's awesome. Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, if you're comfortable? You can always not share anything that's not comfortable, but are you comfortable sharing a little bit about your family dynamics on how is it that you decided trauma was where you wanted to focus?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I wish I could say like I saw the trauma in my family as a starting off point for my own journey. There was never a time that I consciously thought about the trauma in my childhood as the impetus for wanting to be a trauma expert. I never thought that. What I think that is true about my experience is that there are ways that I think for people who've had some type of childhood trauma whether that be interpersonal violence in the family, sexual assault, sexual abuse, physical abuse, whatever that is, that there's a way that we can start to understand through the lens of our own experience and our own journey what clients are experiencing. I don't think it's a prerequisite for trauma recovery specialists or trauma therapists to have trauma in their background, but I do think that it absolutely contextualizes it, right? It helps us understand why things happen the way that they do. And I think specifically from my childhood experience, I think what I began to understand and continue to understand and unravel for myself is, this idea of intergenerational trauma and how it manifests and how it plays out generation to generation, and the roots of that, and how we're all impacted in our community. So I think that, I grew up in a very big, very connected, very, strong family. And I think within that, there were a lot of challenges because there were a lot of adults in that family who hadn't resolved their own trauma. And because of that, there was a lot of trauma that continued to be perpetuated within the family. And so I think that it's definitely informed my experience, but it was never a conscious thought about, this is why I want to do what I do.
Yeah. What I think is wonderful about what you're sharing, and of course, intergenerational trauma equal wonderful is not what I mean. What I mean is, if most families are to be brutally honest with what we know how prevalent trauma is, it is a thing that's woven in somewhere, someplace. And I think the more we talk about it, the more helpful that can be for the healing journey for ourselves and for the work that we do. And I also like that you said it doesn't have to be a prerequisite for the work, because thank God I don't have to be addicted to crack to help my people that I worked with who've had crack addictions. Thank God, so it's impossible for therapists to have personally experienced every issue a client can bring to us. But I think that the key is we all have some sort of suffering. It's a human condition. We suffered somewhere, some way, somehow. And I think that can help us with our compassion button, our empathy button, and that we bring to our work.
Absolutely. I think what how I like to define trauma is, it's a past distressing experience that changes the way we view ourselves and the world around us. And like you said, the human experience is that we all have pain, we all have suffering, and we all have things that feel unresolved to us because we just didn't have either the support or the opportunity to be able to resolve it and to be able to make sense of those difficult experiences. So yeah, we all have a way to connect. It doesn't have to be, I think sometimes people have this belief that if a therapist or a trauma expert hasn't had the same experience, then how can they understand me or help me through my own recovery? But I think that, like you said, it's about being with, like having the tools and understanding about how we resolve trauma and just being able to have that empathy and connect with other people's pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this work, as you know, with your years of doing it, can be a little challenging at times. So how do you best take care of yourself when you're doing this work?
That's such a great question. When I first started, I sucked at taking care of myself.
I'm just laughing because sometimes I had my own personal therapy session today, and we came back to, why is it that I suck at this?
I was really, really bad. I know when I first started, it was really, really bad. I used to joke that, I would work all the time. I developed really bad coping habits. It was almost so I started this pattern of not knowing how to manage what was happening for myself, really just trying to work hard in in support of my clients. And I think over time, what I've realized is that it's really, what's really important to me is not having like, here are all the things that I have to put in place in order to take care of myself. I think what's important is that I'm constantly checking in with myself about what's happening for me right now. What's my capacity right now? What is it that I need? I'm really asking myself those questions over and over and over again, because I think it's easy in this work to lose perspective about what our needs are. And so, and that can shift, right? That can shift over time. Like what I needed as a trauma recovery specialist 10 years ago is very different than what I need today.
Mhm.
And so I think I just try to remain really flexible. And I think there's a way that I'm constantly trying to relearn and rediscover what boundaries mean for me, and really being okay with that, and constantly coming back to my wellness and my own healing, my own care. All of that is my number one priority, because then I can best serve anyone that I want to serve in my community.
Awesome. That's a really great response. Something to chew on for sure. Yeah. Yeah. I was also thinking when you were talking, one of the things I'm learning is it's great to tell your clients all day, well, you need to set limits on this and say no to this. And then, recognizing that sometimes we struggle with saying no,
Mhm.
especially when it comes to when somebody asks us for help and we're
Mhm.
trained, but we
Mhm.
we run out of resources too, just like
Mhm.
anyone else,
Yeah.
and I'm working now on saying not now, you know, no,
Yes.
I can't take 85 clients a week anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. And
I'm
that's
sorry.
okay.
I want to help everybody that asks, because it's so hard to ask for help too. But
Mhm.
there has to be a system in place where I can't now, but maybe later, try me again.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. And I always think about, I think what can be really hard in this work is that it can be very isolating, because, we're doing this work sometimes just ourselves, right? In the
Hmm.
context of our therapy offices and now in this virtual platform. And so I really like to think about who's my broader community, right? Like there's so many people who are doing this work with me, all over my city, all over the state, and like who, just trying to think about how I'm connected to my broader community, and that,
Hmm.
whomever needs to take care of the client that I say no to is going to come into their path.
I hope,
And
yeah, I hope
yeah,
so. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Where I live, there's a huge, it's a bit scary. I'm not trying to have a lack mindset, but there are not enough therapists for the
I
need
know.
in my area. So
Yeah,
I'm
I
thinking
agree.
a lot of areas, especially with the pandemic.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yes, I think that's wonderful to have that out into the universe. Like, okay, I hope this client, the person, if I'm not that person, the person that they end up having is going to be a wonderful fit for them.
Yes, exactly.
That's
Yeah,
a really nice sentiment.
yeah,
So thank you
for
for
sure.
that, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another question I ask my guests usually, and if you're not a reader, it's okay. But I usually ask about like what books along your path as a therapist or
Mm.
just as a human have inspired you or made you just a better person.
That's such a great question too. So I would say that the most impactful book, I am a reader. I'm part of a book club, and shout out to my book club. And we specifically read women of color authored books, and then we, read very
Awesome.
like Latinx or Latina authors. But the one book, I was just thinking about this. I'll tell a very short story after I share the book. But Maya Angelou, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings, um, was really, really impactful for me as a child. I read it when I was 11 years old. And it really, her narrative and her ability to be that vulnerable and share her story impacted me in a way that helped me believe that I could also do the same, right? That I could get out of my circumstances, however I perceive my circumstances, that, I had this belief that if she could do it, I could do it, right?
Mm,
I think that representation and to see other people be able to share their stories and to know that we have the capacity to be resilient and overcome had a huge impact on my life. And so in that, I think I've read every single book that Maya Angelou's ever written.
I love her too.
And so I think that's been really influential for me. When I think about me as a trauma therapist, like what books have informed the way that I work,
Or
there's
inspired
so
you.
many. Yeah, there's so many. I'm trying to think of what I could, I think maybe early on, the things that really motivated me were trying to really read. I was very into, again, serving my community. And so I tried to just like gobble up any authors that were really like focused on serving my community. I think that more than anything, let me think. What's interesting is I think a book that really had an impact on me was Alice Miller's The Drama of the Gifted Child. I think it was really, really helpful for me.
I'm familiar with the author, but not necessarily with that book. So I'm definitely going to check that one out. I love reading too. Did I lose you, Marisol? So Marisol, I'm really curious to learn more about your own podcast. What can you share about that with us?
Yeah. So my podcast is called the Resilience and Resistance Podcast. And it's focused on interviewing successful BIPOC women who are overcoming trauma and becoming resilient. And so it was really based in this idea that so many, women of color have the experience of, intergenerational trauma, past trauma, present day trauma that they experience both personally and professionally. And it's just not something that we get to talk about. We don't really have a platform to be vulnerable in that way. That so many women of color are really focused on achievement, doing what we need to do, and sometimes presenting as having it all together.
Right.
So it was, I started in 2020, obviously during during the lockdown.
During the
what? Yeah, I know. That was like 14 years ago. But it's been great. It's been an opportunity for me to really just dig deep in terms of really understanding how trauma shows up differently for different people, right? That it's not always the symptoms that we typically think about, like depression, anxiety, flashbacks, insomnia, the things that may all be indicators of or symptoms related to unresolved trauma. But sometimes it can show up as, over-focused, over-functioning, high achieving, overworking, and
the typical workaholic behavior.
Right. And so I think sometimes those things can be really adaptive. Like they get us to what we want to in life. And so people can see it, don't really get to see what's underneath, right? Like what are the reasons that motivate us to do those things? So I think that, it's been a great experience, and I'm currently recording our third season.
Ooh. So how many episodes does that make it? Do you know on top of your head?
I think we're somewhere. So I think we've recorded like an average of 12 episodes every season. So we'll like probably be close to 40 episodes at the end of next season.
Wow, I'm super impressed.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a commitment right there. That's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. It was definitely a labor of love. And now it's like
So I think that what I am most excited about that is there aren't many platforms that are made specifically for women of color. So if there's a listener out there, and I'm sure there are, um, who identifies as a woman of color and wants to be a guest on your podcast, how do they go about doing that?
Oh, that's a great question. I often joke that my podcast is really a platform for me to like interview all of my friends. So they're very
Well,
into
you have
the
a lot of
conversation.
friends then if it's up to 40 something.
I know. I have a lot of good friends who are willing to be on my podcast. So, I don't know if we've developed a process, but they can reach out. You can reach out to me directly. If you go to my website, I'm sure there's a contact button
I'm
that
going
you
to
can
list
press.
it, but you're still
Yeah.
welcome to say it. It's
Yeah,
also
yeah. So there's no real magic. You can reach out to me at Marisolerlacher.com.
okay. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm sure somebody out there will take up on the opportunity. I know myself, I also am trying to be more cognizant of, I just want a diverse, at first I wanted to just say no to men. I'm like, no, if I'm excluding them, I'm excluding them from some things like memberships I want women to feel comfortable. But if there's a male survivor who wants to tell a story, that might be okay. But I'm more opening and accepting of men who work with survivors and are open to working with women survivors or offer a good service. I welcome them on as well. But yeah, I really think it's super important to open our media spaces to women of all backgrounds. There's so much healing that can be done that way and see like the themes of what we do have in common as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, what else would you like to share? Oh, I do have a good question about what I hope you'll share. So I think one of the things that can be really helpful to survivors are things like structure and routine. So I kind of love asking like, what does your morning routine look like? Especially if you're doing it the way you want it. Like, what does that look like? Or what's your idea of a perfect bedtime routine? Would you be willing to share one of those?
Oh, absolutely. I could share both. So I always thought that I was a person that was like super flexible, but I've come to realize that I'm a person who like absolutely loves structure and routine. So a perfect ideal or an ideal morning for me would be, I wake up pretty early. So I love getting an early morning workout in. And so early morning workout, come home. I do pretty much the same things all the time. I make myself a vanilla latte every morning. I make it for myself. I make myself a smoothie. I sit, I journal, I do gratitude journaling, I do a meditation, and then I get ready for my day.
Oh my God, I want to be like you when I grow up. How did you get yourself to be consistent with those things? What's your magic?
I think a couple of things. I think sometimes it's really, really hard for me to get up when I don't want to go to the gym or I don't want to do a workout or I don't want to do whatever it is that I have just, it works for me. And so I always tell myself, don't think about it, just get up. And that's the thing that works for me. Because once I get into my head around like, well, I'm tired and I can do it after work and I don't really have to, and I don't, I can convince myself to do anything or do nothing. So I just tell myself, don't think about it, get up. And I always know that I'll feel better.
The times of my life where I have consistently exercised in the morning, it's only because I told my brain, not an option, get up, go.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's the only thing that works for me.
Yeah. Sometimes we have to do the thing. I think about this, like sometimes we do the things that we don't want to do because we know that they're good for us. Right. And, and going to bed at night, I do meditation before I go to bed. And that's about it. Put my sound machine on and then I try to go to bed really early. I think sleep is so foundational and important. And so I try really hard at doing that. And I think that's so important for anyone, particularly survivors, that sleep can get very complicated. Sleep is a thing that can be, one of the most difficult things. And so developing good habits around sleep is really important. Oh, and I drink tea. My son makes me tea every night.
Oh, what kind of tea?
Sleepy time. It's like not that fancy. Like sleepy time is the best.
Very nice. I thought I noticed like in your background, like for people that will on YouTube later will see it, but people in the podcast can't see what I'm seeing, but I see some steam to the side of you, and I didn't
Oh
know.
yeah.
Is that from your tea or from
No,
something else?
it's a little humidifier. How cute is that?
Oh,
The
okay.
one thing that,
Go ahead.
yeah, for those who live in Colorado, know that it is extremely dry here. It's high desert. And so I keep a little humidifier by me for, especially during the winter. The winter is really, really dry. So
Mm-hmm. Well, what a nice way to add that to your self-care too.
yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a part of my self-care.
And what about essential oils? Do you use any of those?
I have like, I'm a person who's not consistent in that way. Like sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. It's kind of a back and forth.
I'm the same way, but I think that I'm like that for a lot of things.
Yeah.
So yeah. Yeah, I need to get more consistent with a whole lot of things right now, but I'm consistently podcasting more. So that's a win for me.
That's right.
Yeah. All right. So as we wrap up our time together, knowing what you know about survivors, there's certain themes, right? There's, you know the pain route really well, but what have you found to be the most or the easiest or most beneficial way of inspiring or planting seeds of hope into the woman you work with? What are your magic tools or tricks for that? How do you instill hope?
Yeah, that's, I think the one thing that I always say is that, because I think the thing that becomes most overwhelming in trauma recovery is the belief that we can get through the pain, right? Because sometimes it feels the pain is so overwhelming that it feels like it's never going to end and we're never going to get through it. And so I think the two things that I always say is like every resource that you had, that you used in some way in your life got you to this point. And there's something that continues to drive you to want to heal something in yourself. And that in itself is like, that's a victory. And so I think that is most important. Like just reminding, like every time you do this, you're showing up for yourself, and it's really hard work, and you're here and you're doing it, and reminding them that, part of our journey in this journey and healing, that we're going to get through it, that the pain, we can get through the pain, and that we know that, and that it's not going to last forever, that there's a possibility that we can get to the other side.
Wow. So the hope here, the hope seed is just the power of showing up.
Yes, the power of showing up.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think that's so powerful because a lot of people don't have the opportunity. And, when you do it, even in a small way, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even if you just listen to this podcast, or you do some research, or you start to like have a conversation or seek out support in some way, like every step is a way that you're showing up for yourself and you're having courage.
Yes. Oh, that was beautiful. Thank you so much.
Of course.
Now, there's still an opportunity. Like, is there anything that you wanted to talk about that I didn't think to ask you, or any other words of wisdom about anything at all? We are open for it.
Oh, I think that, the thing that is most important for me is that we all have the capacity to be resilient, and I think that resilience and the power to grow from our experiences is really important to me. And that everyone who's listening and everyone who has survived something has just the use of your voice and your resilience is an inspiration, even if you don't feel it, if you don't know it. Like your ability to like do something for yourself and move on into your healing journey is going to in some way inspire someone else in the world.
Beautiful. All right, Marisol.
Thank
you
you so
much. Am I saying
much
your
for
name right? Marisol,
yeah.
Am I doing good?
Yeah, it's good.
She gave me a little tip earlier that really helped me. So have a little secret. Well, thank you again so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to come on and help inspire the women that are listening. I deeply appreciate it, and I'm sure others will as well. So
Yeah,
thank
thanks
you.
so much for having me, Karen. I appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you for listening in today. Please join us next week, same day and time. Also, I would love for you to check out my website, healthrivedream.com.